to try to read it with a hole in my tongue, so forgive me if it's hard to understand. The Cataclysm, an allegory for getting cancer immediately after my mother's death. It's as if my world was a massive stained glass mosaic I'd spent years tirelessly building outdoors in a field. I'd been caretaking it through every kind of storm and tribulation I could imagine. Occasionally small pieces, or sometimes even whole chunks, would get knocked out by hailstones and harsh winds. I would, of course, dutifully scramble down my shimmering effigy to fix them, or at the very least, hastily jam them back into place so the whole thing didn't fall down if I was in a rush. Here and there, rain and heat would work together in tandem to oxidize the iron frame, and then I would spend days, sometimes years, scrubbing off the rusty bits that had eaten into the flesh of the metal. In a strange way, though, no matter how harrowing it was at any given time, this was always wholly a labor of love. After decades of collapses, wars, artistic reimaginations, and restarts, 10 diligent and dedicated years of sheer effort had finally yielded a result I could feel comfortable with. I truly felt like I was starting to be happy with how the mosaic was looking. Still quite incomplete, of course, but it was taking shape nicely. On top of that, the weather finally felt safe for the first time ever. The weather felt safe. Safe weather meant new opportunities. I finally had time to go down and work on repairing some of those fallen bits I had fixed too hastily back when I was a less experienced and more rushed artist. I knew it would take a while, but the weather looked safe. I wasn't scrambling on wet grass anymore. I felt my creation was taking clean shape, and most importantly, I finally had the time. I had the time to crawl down off of this massive thing I'd been obsessively making, neurotically repairing, and madly protecting for decades. I could step back, relax, and just enjoy it for a bit before making my repairs. As I started to rest and look upon my mosaic, I pondered what it might become. I supposed that after the repairs were done, I'd start fine-tuning what was left to be built at the top. Maybe I'd add some fine touches to the ironwork. Filigree, maybe. Who knows? Then, in a dash of elated thought, I became ecstatic at the prospect of maybe even beginning to construct a new mosaic. A new mosaic built with the experience and wisdom I gained during my first creation. And finally, in much kinder weather, my daydreams carried me away like a small bird in a gale. Suddenly, there was a quiver in the trees. The animals skittered away, and the birds went silent. This wasn't a storm like I was used to, like I would have been prepared for. The clouds were clear, white, and fluffy. The temperature was mild and beautiful. This wasn't some invading force come to war near my mosaic again and risk tipping it over. This was something different. I could feel it in the air, but it had no familiarity. Discomfort took me. Hairs about my entire body raised up and goosebumps crept across my arms. My vision and equilibrium became disorganized. It suddenly felt and looked as if I were on a boat at sea, rocking and swaying ever so slightly in this grassy field. Fading in quickly, there came a great rumbling from beneath the ground, a deep, rolling and churning sound unlike I'd ever heard, punctuated by a massive, deafening crack. It was as if one of the gods themselves had fallen from the heavens and crashed dead to the ground, hundreds of miles away, each limb's descent creating a separate shockwave. I planted my feet to the ground, locking myself into the sturdiest position I could. Gripping the tethers of my mosaic taut, I felt prepared to preserve my nearly finished masterpiece through whatever cataclysm may come. Soon, starting with the sound like that of a single rock dropping flat onto cement, followed by a million more like it, a massive fissure tore open the very earth beside my mosaic. There I saw jagged, raw earth grinding apart, an enormous crevice 100 yards wide, emitting existentially terrifying sounds. From horizon to horizon, I saw the maw of the Great Mother threatening to swallow me whole. My mosaic teetered precariously on the edge of this unprecedented chasm. Against its draw, I pulled upon the tethers with such strength that I sank into the earth itself under the pressure. When I finally looked down, I saw my legs submerged into the ground up to my knees. Sweating and panting, my face red and shining, I began to catch my breath as I watched the earth slowly close its shattered chasm. As quickly as the cataclysm came, it had left, and now there was an eerie and sudden silence, like the doors to a discordant choral chamber slammed suddenly shut. I noticed a warm sensation on my chin. I was bleeding, perhaps cut by the falling glass from my mosaic. A god had fallen, the earth had split and closed again, and I was bleeding. I thought to myself, I'll deal with it later. A little blood is nothing. What about my mosaic? I glanced upwards, after staring endlessly at the now closed space where the fissure once was, to see a sight of terror. There stood my mosaic without one piece of glass in it. Raw frame, iron and welds, a shattered wooden base, and the tethers in my hands. Every other meticulously placed piece rattled loose and broken onto the grass, leaving only the frame standing. I let loose the tethers. Yet the frame stood tall, all on its own, almost as if it had rooted itself into the ground with permanence, somehow strengthened by the madness that had just transpired. And I was still bleeding? I'd better look at that, I thought, as I scrambled around the ground, searching for the most reflective piece of glass I could find among the grasses. Aha! Here! I exclaimed, as I lifted the tiny mirror to my face, my voice sounding unfamiliar to me. My reflection brought me a grim horror. A wet discomfort swept over my body like a spring flood. How did I not feel this, I thought to myself, as I gazed desperately into the reflection of my own flayed mouth, glistening in the sunlight like ever more brilliant ribbons of crimson silk. Panic set in. Hyperventilation. No, I mustn't panic, I thought to myself. It'll only worsen the bleeding. I have to go to the medicine man over the hill in the city. Only there will they know what to do, and I must go quickly. But the mosaic, I thought. The earthquake ruined it. I must repair it. I pondered this thought briefly before reprimanding myself that if I didn't rush to the city now, I'd bleed out before I had a chance to ever work on my mosaic again. Although its decorations and finery had been shattered, its framework and its foundations had become stronger than ever. The earthquake had locked it to the ground where it stood. The effigy certainly wasn't going anywhere, and I could come back to it when my face wasn't a hanging mess of bloody rags. I'd done my job for the mosaic. I'd held it safely while the earth broke loose. Now it was time to repair the damage I hadn't incurred in the event. So off I went, and I could have never expected how extensive the recommendations of the medicine man would be. I now speak to you from the city, under the auspice of medicine men, getting my face sewn back together and having the glass removed from my mouth. I learned recently that in all the chaos of the cataclysm, I swallowed some of the glass, and it seems they'll have to open up my throat to get the tiny pieces out. They say they'll get it all removed and that it'll be fine. It'll just take a long time and hurt a lot because the small pieces I swallowed went deep. The medicine men talk about the future with me occasionally, but in limited scope. Recently, one of them mentioned that some of the pieces are so minuscule that they'll need me to be in the city all of the time to make sure none of them get loose and cut up my insides. They say that could put my life in danger. I might not be able to go back to my beautiful field with my beautiful mosaic for a while, because I need to be here to make sure I'm well enough to rebuild it properly when I get back. I know my frame will still be there, waiting for me. And so, even trapped here, in this city, with all of these people prodding at me and cutting me open, I am happy. Because my original framework is clearer and stronger now than it has ever been. I certainly haven't figured out how to put the mosaic pieces back together yet. Although I ponder it occasionally, after everything, in honesty, I can barely remember what the picture even was. Between the cataclysm and my injuries, my head is still spinning. My balance is completely thrown off. I've been in these damned recovery beds so long that the simple act of standing up feels strange. What I have been able to focus on, however, is the memory of that wrought iron frame stuck in the ground, having rid itself of its cheaply built wooden bracing, standing upright like a great hollow cross-sectioned obelisk against the blue sky. It held its shape. It never fell, despite the entire planet rending beneath it. I remember it as the strongest thing I'd ever seen, and I know that it will stand there firmly until I am ready to come paint beautiful glass upon it again. I will paint upon it new and glorious images, born from experience, wisdom, and the humility that only cataclysm and profound injury can bring. So I have been clinging desperately to that iron frame, and the new picture I will imbue it with for balance and bearing as the shock waves come and go. That frame, to me, is my will to live, my sense of determination, the core foundations of who I am as a person. I know that I will make it through this because the frame has made it through already, and I take incredible solace in that fact. I'm sure the mosaic will not look the same when I am done building it, but the frame remained unchanged, beautiful, and impossibly strong. And to me, that is an already existent proof of my own survival. The end. Thank you for listening, everybody. And again, thank you for all your donations and all your support. You are making my survival possible. Claire is making my survival possible. And the frame of my mosaic is making my survival possible. Thank you all, and I love you. Goodbye.